We're looking at Psalm 36 together in our Wonderful Day in the Lord broadcast. Yesterday we looked at a kind of a gloomy picture. The psalmist is looking around and making observations of how the unbeliever, who are dead in their sins, how they live, how they think, how they process their attitudes, and he sees all this gloom, all this sinfulness in the heart and the life and the actions and the speech of these unbelievers. But he doesn't wallow in that grief and that gloom. As a matter of fact, when we turn to verse 5, we find even though he recognizes these things to be true among so many people in his world, this does not frame him. This does not determine how he acts and how he thinks and how he looks at life, and especially how he looks at God. And so actually we're turning at this point from the gloom to the glory, and from the darkness of those around him who are not walking with God, and the darkness of the world around him, to the delights of God. So he doesn't allow his thoughts and his heart and his attitude to be framed by the sinfulness around him or sinful people around him. He rather wants to be framed and developed and so forth by who God is. And so he turns to God and he begins to look at that. And we have some wonderful verses, starting with verse 7. We'll go through verse 5. We'll go through verse 6 today. I want to show you 5 different attributes of God that he wants to highlight, things that he's focusing on, things he's thinking on. You know, you and I can think about the evil things and the corrupt things of our world, and we get down, we get gloomy, we get depressed. But we can turn our attention otherwise to the things that are true about God, and that changes the way we live, the way we think, the way we process. So notice here, he turns to the Lord, and the first thing he wants to talk about is God's loving kindness. Verse 5, your loving kindness, O Lord, extends to the heavens. So loving kindness is this wonderful Hebrew word, hesed, that we like to talk about when we're going through the Psalms. Once again, it encompasses a number of things, love, mercy, faithfulness, all bundled up in one word. And so he looks at that loving kindness of God, and he says it extends to the heaven. There's no end to the loving kindness of God. And that brings him great joy and great delight, even though he looks around him at people who have totally rejected God and all God has to offer. But he isn't focusing on that. He's focusing on God. And first thing he focuses on is this loving kindness that has no limit. The second thing is the faithfulness of God. It reaches to the skies. One of the great attributes of God that we appreciate so much, and the psalmists often turn to it as well as other writers of Scripture, is God's faithfulness. And we appreciate it so much because there's so little in this world that is faithful. So few people that we could say are faithful. So few things in this world system that we can depend upon. And so when we realize that the Lord is faithful, that warms our hearts and draws us to him. And once again, this faithfulness reaches to the skies. There is no limit to the faithfulness of God. And then he turns to the righteousness of the Lord. Your righteousness is like the mountains of God. And so God is right in all that he does. He's holy in all that he does. And it's like the mountains of God. When we think of the mountains, we think of majesty, and we think of power, and we think of protection even, the rock solidness of the mountains. And that is the righteousness of God as he looks at it. Fourth, he talks about the judgments of God. In verse 6, your judgments are like your judgments are like a great deep. So now he's gone the other direction. God's judgment, as he looks at anything, he judges rightly, and it's deep. It's not fickle. It's not determined by witnesses, false or not. It's not determined by any form of corruption. That God cannot be bribed. And so his judgments are always deep and true and real. And then finally, he turns to the next phrase. He says, O Lord, you preserve man and beast. And so now he is thanking the Lord for his preservation, the Lord's protection, the Lord seeing him through the difficult times of life and all that surround him, and especially in light of what we saw yesterday of the sinfulness and corruption of the people around him. and the sinfulness around him, how thankful he is that the Lord preserves him even in the midst of all of that. And so as he turns his attention away from the gloom and to the glory, his life is changing, his heart is changing, and he walks away with a heart filled with the wonders and the glories of God. That's what this psalm does for us. I hope it does that for you today, and that it gives you a wonderful day in the Lord.